A lot of entertainment resources, amusements resources, and pair of quotations so much we did for example, and we're family members, FMs, and family and friends, of course, of course. Very important resource, money, courses, supplies, materials, resources for strong faith, loyalty. Reading this aloud and saying this aloud. Strong faith, loyalty, fidelity, fiduciary. Strong faith, loyalty, committed, committed, beneficial, beneficial, lucrative, lucrative, valuable, valuable, invaluable, invaluable, priceless, priceless, committed, committed, committed. Strong faith, loyalty, fidelity, fiduciary, valuable, invaluable, priceless, priceless, committed, committed, beneficial, beneficial, valuable, lucrative, intelligent, intelligent, smart, smartly, cunning, clever, intelligent. Strong faith, loyalty, fidelity, fiduciary. Strong faith, loyalty, for example. For instance, so-called, and intelligent, smart, smartly, cunning, clever, intelligent, strong faith, loyalty, smart, smartly, cunning, clever, intelligent, committed, beneficial, lucrative, valuable, strong faith, loyalty, fidelity, strong faith, loyalty, for example, for instance, so-called, and we're family and friends, reading this aloud and saying this aloud, for example, maybe about that, maybe at sort of at the same time, at about the same time, about at the same time, at about the same time, and for example, again and again and not again, and for example, for instance, so-called. Different ratios, proportions, resources, money, courses, supplies, withdrawals. Oftentimes in the absence of extreme prolonged long duration, confusion, murkiness, frightened, scared, confusion, and very appropriate and safe and sound. Oftentimes, sort of speaking for himself or himself, the man individual person said, paraphrase quotation summary repeated, that he or she was not, for example, a prolonged long duration, confused, murkiness, frightened, scared, and said prolonged long duration, clarity, clearness, and purposeful, understanding, purposeful, understanding, and clearness, and clarity, about 100% of the time, clarity, the absence of prolonged long duration, confusion, murkiness, frightened, scared, and I said prolonged long duration, clarity, clearness, and purposeful, understanding, and clearness, clarity, and for example, so-called. A lot of good signs, hints, clues, suggestions, very obvious, very apparent, very inherent, very instinctual, and the absence of prolonged long duration games, and to be very important, direct works, derivative works, and sort of our survival in that book, little movie script, book, little writing jokes, energy, resources, and the paraphrase quotations. Have they ate or drank those foods yet? Well, there's still margins. There's maybe days or months, or maybe days or weeks or months, Have they ate those very, very good or very appropriate, safe, sound food and drinks, or gone to those websites and blogs? Maybe for that individual, those persons whose life depends upon it. And this book, Little Movie Script, reading this aloud, and saying that they probably know who they are. And many of us probably know who we are. Many of us probably know who we are. Dependent upon in large part different margins, different substitute alternatives, different websites, various different websites, blogs, and foods and drinks. And for many of our organizations groups, very poor resource, money, currency, supplies, materials, resources, a lot of entertainment, resources, money, currency, supplies, materials, resources, for example, for instance, very poor ratios, proportions, resources, money, currency, supplies, materials, very implied contracts, for implied agreements, and so-called subject to reasonable interpretations, understandings, if you so choose to decide. Very poor resources, money is telephones, mobile phones, cell phones, radio stations, television stations, books that are writing jokes, radio shows, television shows, books that are writing jokes, music, and books that are writing jokes, for example. And oftentimes by birth, by blood, our real lifetime memberships, world lifetime citizenships, different so-called business partners, BP, business associates, BA, different commercial partners, CP, commercial associates, CA, different associates and partners, different partners and associates, different so-called industrial partners, AA, IP, industrial partners, IP, industrial associates, IA, commercial associates, CA, commercial partners, CP, business associates, BP, business associates, BP, business associates, BP, business associates, BA, business associates, BA, oftentimes spelled that way, and industrial partners, IP, industrial associates, IA, and commercial associates, CA, Commercial Associates, CA, Commercial Partners, CP, Commercial Partners, CP, Business Associates, BA, Business Associates, BA, and Business Partners, BP, and Commercial Associates, CA, and very important resource monies courses, our real lifetime memberships, our real lifetime citizenships, and our fellow member citizens, our coaching and family members, FMs, our coaching and family members, FMs, and family friends, and our organization groups, militaries, government sections, species, ethnic races, for example. Absolutely, and for instance, it's so cool. It's so cool. Very excellent, fine, and good about 100% of the time here. Very excellent, fine, and good about 100% of the time here. And about as good as it gets HH in your year about 100% of the time. About as good as it gets HH in your year about 100% of the time here. And very obvious and very apparent, very obvious and very important. Parent resource, money, courses, supplies, materials. Resources are very, very important, very important. For us, probably not really, but for many of us, probably sort of speaking for myself, and of our mamas and papas, our mamas and papas, our papas and mamas, and papas and mamas. And in this book, Little Movie Script, the man in person said they'd probably be, in many ways, some of the most scariest, those so-called papas and mamas, those so-called papas and mamas, those so-called mamas and papas, those so-called mamas and papas and papas and mamas, just kidding or just joking. Because, paraphrase someone's muted, there's a mama and papa. I love hugs and healing hugs, very lot of laughter. I love hugs and healing hugs, very appropriate and safe and sound. Love hugs and healing healing touches, and very important kinetic energies, resources, monies, and consecration, blessings, and very important gestures, motions, and movements. For example, so-called different keyboards, and buttons, and pulleys, ropes, and levers, and resources, monies, courses, writings, and pens. Pencils, papers, and crayons, and markers, and resources, and stylos, and pens, and papers, and drawings, and cartoonish, and drawings, and books that are writing jokes, and papers and documents that are books that are writing jokes, direct works, and derivative works, and resources, money, courses, supplies, materials, and resources, for example. In the book, The Movie Script, the man and the real person sort of jokes and said, those mamas and papas, those papas and mamas would probably be, in many ways, some of those most scariest, just kidding or just joking. Some of the most frightening, and some of the most scariest, just kidding or just joking. I love hugs and healing hugs, and very appropriate and safe and sound. Very appropriate and safe and sound for many of us, and very appropriate and safe and sound. And reading that aloud in paraphrase quotation summary riveted, the man individual said, paraphrase quotation summary riveted, to be continued, or continued, and different news videos, and books that are writing jokes, and news articles, and books that are writing jokes from around the world, different news articles, NA, and news videos, NV, and books that are writing jokes, and from around the world, around the universe, reading aloud and saying aloud in paraphrase quotation summary riveted. And very excellent, fine, and good about 100% of the time. Very excellent, fine, and good about 100% of the time. And for example, for instance, so-called, and paraphrase quotation, summarize, abbreviated. Very appropriate and safe and sound about 100% of the time. Very appropriate and safe and sound about 100% of the time. Very excellent, fine, and good about 100% of the time. Very excellent, fine, and good about 100% of the time. And we're family members, FMs, and family members, FMs, and family and friends, for example.